Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Seth, one of the co-hosts of Engage Podcast, to give you some of my my announcements before we get into today's episode. First of all, if you're new to the podcast, I want to go ahead and just say welcome. Listen, we love hearing from our new listeners. So wherever you're listening to this episode right now, whether it be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Overcast, wherever, YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe, and that way you can get notified every time we come out with a new episode of Engage Podcast every single Thursday. Also, go ahead and just drop us a little, a shout out. Go ahead and email us at office@faithpc.net and just say hi. Tell us who you are. Tell us your story. Tell us what you thought of the podcast. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and drop a comment down below. We would love to hear from you and hear what you thought of today's episode or episodes like this. Also, there's a few weeks left of our outside services here at Faith Presbyterian Church. If you want to get back into church, but you're not comfortable with the whole church aspect, this is the perfect way to get back into it. It's outside. You can sit in your cars, pump up the heat this time of year, or the AC, you never know. Or you can get a lawn chair and tailgate with the many other people that do. Listen, they're so much fun. And as of the first Sunday in November, we're actually going back into the church, and we're going to have a video coming out on our YouTube page here pretty soon. That's going to be detailing you visually how that's going to look. And I guarantee it, I'm so excited because I guarantee it, there's no other church in our area, I would even say within a 100-mile radius of our church, that's doing what we're doing. We have put so much thought into this. We've worked so hard, me, pastor, and the many staff and helpers at Faith Presbyterian Church to get this to work. And I'm telling you, I'm so incredibly excited to see it finally come to fruition. So that's going to be the first week of November. I hope to see you there. Let's get to today's episode. Our guest today is just a fantastic person. Listen, so I could not help myself in this particular podcast episode. If you see the video version on YouTube, you could totally see I am trying so hard not to be like starry fan. His name is Douglas Wilson. If you don't know who Douglas Wilson is, he's a pastor in Moscow, Idaho. He has taught at the Desiring God, which is the ministry by John Piper. He's preached at their conferences. He's just a fantastic preacher. He's a fantastic pastor, and I have been blessed by his ministry for the last 5 years, and can see in detail. I can remember reading his book, Mother Kirk, and I remember just that book changing my whole outlook on how the church is meant to be biblically, and it was a life-changing moment for me. And I've been blessed by reading his books and reading his blogs and listening to his podcasts, the Plodcast, every single Wednesday. You guys are in for a great episode. Listen, if you're not a churchgoer, there's still so many great things to take out of today's episode. If you are a churchgoer, there's amazing things to be taken out of this episode. So give it up for our friend, Douglas Wilson.
Wait 1 second. Can you hear us? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear us.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Actually, we could hear you the whole time. We were just messing with you.
First of all, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm very well. How has Christchurch been through the whole COVID-19 epidemic?
We've been thriving and growing.
Oh, yeah? Very cool. Us too. Yeah. By the way, before we get into it, I want to say I loved your Plodcast episode about John MacArthur's choice of going against the state's order. That was very well put, very well done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I heard you have a new book coming out.
I do.
So, oh, there you go. Okay. Ride, Sally, ride. just to humor Pastor over here. Tell him what it's about.
You sure?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So it's a dystopic dark comedy set about 20 years in the future. It's about true love and the crack up of the United States. And a young college student, it's a Phineas moment where a man introduces his sex doll to an evangelical family as his wife.
Wait.
And long story, but in the first chapter, the young man works at a recycling plant and winds up compacting the sex doll at the recycling center. And a woke prosecutor charges him with first-degree murder because he was identified as that man's wife. That's the setup.
It sounds like a biography of You've Been Watching My Life. So listen, let's get to know each other just a little bit. We do have some
Good.
A list of questions for you because we kind of don't want this to be a testimony as much as to learn, for people out there to learn about what it means to be a pastor. This is going to air in October during Pastor Appreciation Month. You know,
Okay.
when you get all those goodies, right, and gift certificates to restaurants and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Or did that end already for you?
Yeah.
So this is called Pastor2Pastor, and this is going to air in October, but we've never met before. And so my name is Anthony Cloditis. I'm the pastor here at Faith Presbyterian Church. We're in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. We're like, what, an hour and a half from Pittsburgh or something like that?
Hour and a half north of Pittsburgh.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the area, but so you'll probably hear some Pittsburghese accents going on because I grew up around here. And Seth is our tech guy and youth guy, and we are in the Engage podcast studio. And where are you right now? Are you in the Library of Congress?
That's my, over the last few months, I've gained some expertise in switching backgrounds in Zoom.
That's impressive.
Yeah. So I think that's the Trinity Library in Dublin.
Very nice.
Yeah. So do us a favor. Why don't you share for the audience just the basics for those who are listening, that they can get to know you a little bit.
Okay. My name is Douglas Wilson. I'm the pastor of Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. If you don't know where that is, Idaho has a panhandle that runs up to Canada, and we're up in the panhandle. So we're a long way from the potatoes. Potatoes are all grown down south. We're up in the wooded area. So I've been the pastor of Christ Church since 1977. So little over 40 years. And the church, I was the song leader. I was there when the church was founded and served as a Sunday class teacher and song leader and that sort of thing for about a year and a half. And one day the pastor announced that he had gotten a job in another city and he was going to be gone the next Sunday, and good luck everybody. And so he was off. He left. And so I preached the next Sunday, and that's how I wound up in the pastorate of Christ Church.
Wow.
So did you ever have any inklings of wanting to be a senior pastor, whatever word you want to call it, but being the lead pastor? Or was it something that, did you find it, or did it find you, or how'd that happen?
It found me. I had inklings of not wanting to do that. I wanted to be in ministry, and I was preparing to, but I was more interested in apologetics or evangelistic ministry. My father ran a series of literature ministry bookstores. So he had opened one up here in Moscow, Idaho. I was off in the Navy. I decided I'll just declare residency in Idaho, coming out of the Navy, go to school there to catch up with my folks. And then I was going to go down the road to another small college town and open up a literature mission bookstore like my dad was doing. So I studied philosophy at the U of I, and I was doing that for apologetics purposes, studying what the non-believers thought and how they made sense of the world and so on. The church started like just a few weeks after I got out of the Navy, and I went to the founding meeting. My wife was there. We weren't together yet. So we're two of the original plank owners for the church. We got together within that first year, and I was a student. And when I found myself preaching, and the church grew and flourished, and by the time I was done with my school, it wasn't really possible to get away to do seminary or anything like that because the church was already hopping.
Now the church it's a Reformed church, correct?
Yes, we're part of the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, CREC. We're Presbyterian in effect. So
for someone listening out there who's not familiar with the term Reformed or what that means, just if you can briefly unpack that a little bit, so someone listening could say, "Oh, he's Reformed," or "the church is Reformed. Here's what that means." I mean, just very briefly. Sure.
Basically, that term goes back to the Protestant Reformation, and so if someone says they're Reformed, the index card version or the elevator pitch version would be that we believe in the exhaustive sovereignty of God over all things and through all things and in all things. So all of Christ for all of life. We don't want Sunday go to meeting Christianity. We want to live as Christians in a distinctively Christian way in all that we do, because God is sovereign and his authority extends into every area of life. So that would mean we're Calvinistic in our soteriology. That would mean that we are connected to the historic church prior to the Reformation. We're not, many North American evangelical churches are restorationist. They believe in some version of the original church went away, apostatized, fell off the earth, and then was rebooted in the Reformation or the 18th century or in a revival in Kansas City in the early 20th century. We're not restorationists. We believe that Christ has been with his church the whole time, although the church has been in need of reformations and restorations from time to time.
Sure. Yeah. Now, my background is the seminary that I attended is Reformed Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Pittsburgh. Have you ever heard of that or had any dealings with the seminary there?
Yes, I've not had dealings with it, but I'm aware of it. Yes.
We partied like it's $15.99 when I went there. One of the things that I didn't realize was one of the distinctives. I just wanted to go to a seminary that was conservative, that right. I wasn't going to battle all those kind of outrageous liberal claims about the Bible. I figured I can get that anywhere. I'm not going to waste my time, money, and energy there.
Right.
And the first day of seminary, we gather in chapel, and a kid walks forward, and he pulls out like a ukulele, and I hear him play do 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 do, and I'm like, what is happening right now? And then they took out the Psalms, and they started singing them. Now that went on for the first week, and in my mind, I thought it was Throwback Week. Like I thought they were going to transition into what other churches are doing.
That won't be normal.
Oh man, they're serious as a heart attack, man, and they'll fight you to the death on those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it was a shock for me because it was like stepping back in time, but I would not change that experience because it was so rich, and they took the Bible exegetically so serious that it was just very beneficial. Very cool. Okay, so you mentioned that you were kind of a founding person at the church and that you were there for 40 years.
Right.
Explain to people the importance of a pastor's longevity at a church. And let me preface this by saying, the church I was before here, I've been here a little over 4 years, and I was at Northminster Pres for about 15. And one of the things that I found extremely gratifying that I would not have thought of before was being at a church for an extended period of time, that walking with people through different stages of their life and phases of their life was so gratifying for me. Explain to people kind of the richness of being at a church for an extended period of time.
Yeah, there's some of this, some people might describe as sentimentalism, but I don't really think it's sentimentalism. One of the things I didn't mention, Reformed theology emphasizes the importance of the covenant, and covenants extend over time. And so it's a tremendous blessing when I can perform the wedding for the children of people I baptized when they were infants. So, so it's this life cycle sort of thing, where you're dealing with people in all stages of their life, and you were a witness to it.
Yes.
You were there when their folks got married. You were there when they were baptized. You were there when they graduated from high school, and you were their pastor through that whole time.
Yes.
One of the, and this, I think, enables a pastor and his people to get entangled in the right kinds of ways. If you treat it like a duty assignment in the Navy, where they transfer you every 2 years, you're going to build up calluses to keep from getting too attached to people. And I think that there are temptations. No matter what you do, there are going to be temptations. But I think being a pastor of these people for over 4 decades has been an incalculable blessing to me, and I think to them, because I know them. Institutional memory is a thing, right? I know how this place works, and I know it in my bones.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, that is not something that if you asked me back in Bible college or seminary, kind of the question upon graduating, what do you look forward to the most? I'm sure it would have been something like preaching, teaching, but it's through that longevity. And I shared the same experience here while interviewing for the job, the benefits of walking with people. I was very young when I started at Northminster, and there was a guy that was in my youth group that was kind of a senior. And then I walked with him through his college days. I'd show up there randomly and eat lunch with him. And then the next thing is he's introducing me to his girlfriend, and that girlfriend becomes his wife. And I'm standing there and I'm marrying them. Then the next thing you know is I'm baptizing their child. And then years later, he's sitting across from me at a session meeting.
Yeah.
And, that is probably the richest part of ministry. But there's another thing I think too, and you mentioned when pastors go from church to church to church every 2 or 3 years, that pastor doesn't learn to grow through issues. It seems like it's just a series of doing the same thing over and over, and then when they hit a wall, they just take the easy route and they escape. And so their career in ministry ends up being, I pastored 10 or 15 churches 2 or 3 to 5 years, and that's my career. Whereas someone like you has been there, and your roots are so deep and it's so rich. It's a really cool experience. I admire that about you and any pastor that could be somewhere for a long time.
Great blessing.
And well, and the other thing too is, and reason why I appreciate you and I love everything that at least that you've done and you've written about, is that you guys are really tapping into the whole media thing. Like you have Canon Press, which I think is so cool. I actually found you through your Ask Pastor Doug videos.
Right.
You did a video, and or it wasn't the Ask Pastor Doug, but it was an interview you did with Mark Driscoll.
Okay.
And that was, to me, a really cool, like, just hearing how you interviewed him. It was very well done. And then I found your Ask Pastor Doug videos, and then I just fell in love with that format. And then everything you guys have done has really tapped into that media. And to me, as a younger person, I really, really, really appreciate that, because that gets the word out.
Well,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
So you've been there for about 40 years.
Right.
Share with us. A lot of these questions are for folks who are listening, who are tapping into this podcast saying, I've never been to church, or when I think about pastors, sure, they work one day a week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
In those 40 years, not just for you, but in general, what you've done with other pastors, tell us about what are 2 qualities, or maybe 3, that are imperative for a minister to have in ministry.
So I would say, and I think this has always been the case, but in the crazy season that we're currently in, it is absolutely essential that a pastor be a vertebrate. He has to have a backbone, because people aren't. What a pastor does is he guides, he leads, he feeds, he protects. And you can't be a shepherd unless you are willing to fight wolves.
Wow.
In Acts 20, Paul tells the Ephesian elders, I know that after my departure, savage wolves are going to come in and ravage the flock. And so I believe that Chesterton says somewhere that a person ought not to fight because he hates what's in front of him, but rather because he loves what's behind him. And so a pastor, I think, has to be a vertebrate who loves. Right? So sometimes some guys are built for combat, right? But it's one speed, and that's all they do. That's all they do. But the Bible says not to make a belligerent man into an elder. A bellicose man, a man who fights because he loves fighting, is not qualified. But a man who loves to love and doesn't want any conflict at all, ever, doesn't really love. And so the illustration for ministry that I use, I'd probably narrow it down to two main characteristics. One would be commitment to truth, and the other would be commitment to love. And I compare truth to the skeleton, like the bone. A bone is hard, rigid, unyielding. You could clock somebody on the head with it. Truth is just there. Well, love is like the flesh that encases the bone. Love is soft, yielding, but it needs the structure of the bone. If we were all bones, no flesh, we're like that skeleton hanging in the science classroom, right? Every bone in the Westminster Confession of Faith is there, and it's in its right place, but it's a dead skeleton. If that's all truth, no love. But if it's all love, no truth, then everybody's a beanbag chair. Just imagine what we'd be like if we had no bones. We'd be an amorphous glob. And much of evangelicalism today is love without bones, love without truth. And so people undulate toward you in the narthex, welcome to our church. And then other orthodoxy churches, truth-oriented churches, it's all bone. And so I would say that a pastor has to have a skeleton where the bones are intact and not out of joint, but he's got to be able to touch somebody and not have it be a clammy skeleton claw.
I imagine, and I agree with you, that's the perfect kind of seesaw that Paul shares with speaking the truth in love.
Right.
But I have just found that people in general are not, they don't do that. Okay.
Right.
And I have found that most people either by virtue of their personality or just kind of one or the other. What, for you, do you find yourself leaning towards one or the other, love or truth? Maybe not now, but at one point in your life.
Yeah, I would say if you're asking for what I think my factory settings are, I think that I'm truth oriented. I think that if you gave, if I didn't have people around to correct and balance and do that sort of thing, if I was allowed to veer, I think that that's the direction I would veer. Yeah. I'm not a sentimentalist. I love content. I love truth. I love doctrine. But I also have been blessed with having the mentor or the pastor or the model that inspired me the most was frankly my father, who was in ministry for many, many years. And he also was truth oriented. But one of the truths that he learned early on was that truth that isn't applied isn't truth. You're making it false by not putting it into practice.
Sort of kind of like the book of James theme.
Exactly.
One of my favorite stories you shared about your dad, I forget where I heard it, but you were talking about how your dad used to stuff, it was like sermon recording tapes in his jacket when he'd go on airplanes.
Or tracks.
Yeah, tracks. Yeah. And then, like you said that he would have one in like Swahili or Hindi, and he would just pass them out to people. And he would always have these like hilarious encounters, but he was that connected to just inviting people and talking to people that he would go to that length to connect.
Yeah, he would do things like that, expecting God to match it up with something, expecting God to answer prayer.
That's so cool. That's very cool. So I have a question, and that is, and this is a big one. How do you define success in ministry?
Okay. So this is a challenging question, and it requires a two-layered answer.
I'm ready.
Okay. Because there's two kinds of success. There's success in terms of the final judgment. Paul says we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And if we asked a question like, was Jeremiah's ministry a success? Well, it was with God, right? And in Hebrews 11, there are men of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in caves. They were sawn in two. They were, they had a really rough go. And it would be hard to say that they had a successful ministry, but they were a success in God's sight. They would be received into heaven with a well done, good and faithful servant. So there are missionaries and pastors who labor thanklessly in a very barren field, and I think C.S. Lewis comments on how sometimes the altar is built in one place so that the fire may fall in another place, and God's in charge of that. So there's a certain kind of ministry success that would be reckoned as a failure in earthly terms, right? But God would reckon it as a success. Nevertheless, what Jeremiah didn't get, what Jeremiah didn't receive, he was still working toward. He didn't win the ear of the king of Judea, but he knew he wanted to. That's a horizontal success. So the second layer of success would be Paul says in Colossians that to this end I labor, seeking to present every man perfect in Christ. So a pastoral success should be the maturation of God's people growing up into a perfect man, Ephesians 4. So you're laboring to have everything come together. You want to present all your people to God as mature or complete or well taught or trained, and that's the visible, photographable kind of success, if that makes sense. So we're all ministers should strive for that sort of success, But if God in his providence denies it, we should be adamant about the need for the first kind of success, where we're faithful more. We want to be faithful more than we want to be successful.
I'm really glad you said that last part, that pastors should be adamant about the second kind of success, by not taking away from the first. Clearly, right. The first, you need both, but yeah. I've just run into the quote unquote super spiritual believer pastor that kind of just ignores B and just talks about A. Mm-hmm. And it's really just an inadequacy on their part, right. that they're not willing to address or work on. Right. You see what I'm saying? And so I'm glad you added that part in there. So you've walked a long time, 40 years. That 40 is famous in the Bible, right? Yes. You got Moses in the wilderness. You got Jesus fasting for all that time. So, you've probably had a lot of disappointment in your ministry. Mm-hmm. Share with us maybe about disappointment, and something you've learned from those things.
So I would say I would have to reckon as the biggest sort of disappointment, and it's probably happened a handful of times. It's happened more than once, I'll put it that way, where someone who was your co-laborer in ministry, who was on staff, or you worked shoulder to shoulder, you went through battles together, and then one day he flakes on you. He falls away, or he veers off into some weird doctrine, or flips, leaves the church disgruntled. So it's, when it comes to accusations that outsiders make, I think I've got a pretty thick skin, because I know if some troll on the internet is saying a bunch of things about me that everybody who knows me knows that it's not true, and it's easy to disprove. It's easy to just say, look, don't feed the trolls. But when someone worked on your staff together with you for years, and then all of a sudden they blow up and they're talking about this sort of, I finally escaped that outfit, and I can't believe what they used to do. That kind of thing is grievous. That kind of thing is just it's a gut punch. And it happened to Jesus. We need to never forget that Jesus prayed all night before he picked Judas.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, is there something that you learned as a person, or as how you run a church, as a staff, organizationally, I should say, on how you deal with things like that?
Yeah. Pay attention to early warning signs. So it always feels like, it's particularly if you're close to someone, it's always easy to spot them that's just them, or that's just a quirk. But then in retrospect, you see that, man, they were showing signs of trouble maybe for 6 months before it finally blew up. And so the thing I've learned, my takeaway, is to confront it early, or deal with it early. Don't wait till it's a big gnarly mess. Yeah. And by confront it early, I don't mean you fire him early. I mean, pursue it. Say, hey, what's up? What are you doing here? Off of little things. Don't let the little acorns grow into big oaks.
Yeah, that's good. So you had mentioned starting, kind of getting thrown into the pastorate. You did attend seminary at some point, correct?
Sort of. Sort of, kind of. So I got a BA and an MA in philosophy from the University of Idaho. And since I did the BA, I got my Greek at the state school. It was classical Greek, but I got my Greek there. And then after in the late 70s, I was able to get away for a brief time to do seminary, some seminary classes at Regent College in Vancouver. So there's one instructor. I had 4 classes up there. One was John Stott, another was Leon Morris, another was Brian Griffiths, and I forget the 4th guy. But I had some seminary there, but I was only able to get away for a brief moment because I was already the pastor of a church of 200 to 300 people.
Yeah. Do you think it's beneficial for young people to go sort of right to seminary without having any work experience?
No.
Say more.
Okay, so I believe that, well, this is something I think we should take a page from what the Jews used to do. The Apostle Paul was trained as a rabbi, but part of rabbinical training was they had to know a trade. And Paul's was that of tent making. I believe that there are a lot of theological errors that could be prevented through calluses on the hands.
Cool.
Right.
Great quote.
All right. So young men, and there's a real danger. Some young men have been pinched on the cheek ever since they were a little boy by the ladies of the church and told that they'd be a great pastor, or they're such a pious young boy. And oftentimes, if they go to a Christian high school and then they go through college and then they go straight to seminary, and then they're out of seminary 26 years old, let's say, married and one baby, and no life experience with how pagans or regular people in the church have to function or navigate. How on earth can you preach to people when you don't have any earthly idea of what their lives are like? Everything you know out of books. And I think pastors need to know people out of their lives, not just what they've read about in books. So I went from high school into the Navy. I spent just under 4 years in the Navy. I was in the submarine service, and that time was invaluable to me. I learned people. I studied people.
Doug, this is one very important topic for my heart, because I got saved when I was a senior in high school, embraced Christ, and I went straight to Bible college in Georgia at a little place called Toccoa Falls College.
Yeah.
And I started working in the church. I never unpacked. I went straight to my first call. And probably 6 or 7 years later, I realized that God had more for me. And so one of those ways that I can do more was to advance my education. So that's when I went to RPTS.
Yeah.
My experience at RPTS versus Toccoa was totally different, because now I've been working in the church for some time. And while I was in school, I was working in the church. So I was driving home an hour and a half at night, scratching my head going, okay, how can I explain to these people what I just learned was?
Yeah.
So, but to your point, I remember watching students who went from undergrad straight to seminary, raising their hands and asking these crazy questions. And I just remember closing my eyes, putting my head down, saying a short prayer, saying to myself, enjoy the question, because it's the first and last time you're ever going to ask it. I have experienced the actual hands on the feet. Most pastors, for some reason, have their head in the clouds. Not all, but that just seems to be the theme. But I think having your head in the clouds and feet on the ground bring a much richer and powerful pastoral experience in that you are able to lead people.
Yes.
Very good.
And if you're just the bookish sort who spends all your time in big fat books, one of the things that's going to be evident about you is that men won't follow you. And if men won't follow you, that's going to affect the character and personality of the church. You want to be able to have the pastor be a respected figure among the men of the church.
I think Eisenhower said, I could be wrong on this, but in terms of the attributing who said this, that if you think you're a leader and you turn around and there's no one behind you, you're just out for a walk.
Yeah.
You know, and at the end of the day, real respect's real. Real recognizes real. And as you grow and you get older, especially with men, I don't know, I like to say I have a nose for it. You can just sense right away, you know, who has been through the issues, you know.
Right.
Very cool. So, what is your favorite book, or if not book, verse of the Bible, and why?
Okay, so first I need to say that I'm by no means wanting to disparage any other part of the Word of God.
Of course.
But I would have to say my favorite book is Ephesians.
Very cool.
And the reason is all of the Bible is true and infallible and true and inerrant. But it seems to me that Ephesians has the most truth per square inch. It's densely packed, and every word is there for a reason. And it's just, and every significant topic is covered by the book of Ephesians. And it's all there in a brief compass, and it's like hand-packed ice cream. So the book of Ephesians would have to be, I would probably go with that.
On a lighter note, what's your favorite ice cream?
I would say cookies and cream.
What's your favorite ice cream?
I would have to say cookies and cream too.
Brown nosing.
See that?
All right, so now we know your favorite book of the Bible. Is there anyone in the Bible particularly that you identify with? Like when you read their story, you can almost picture yourself being in their shoes, or they had the same kind of personality as you.
I would have to say, you know, I know that Paul kicks against people saying this, but I believe that it would be fair to say that I was a Paulinist, right? Right. So, and it's just a function of feeling like I know him the best. Out of all the Bible characters, I relate to him more readily. I get what he's getting at more quickly. And of course, he wrote a lot of letters, but I would say that Paul is the character I identify with the most, and whose framework and teaching has sort of built out my worldview.
I mean, you talk about with a guy with a backbone. Paul definitely fits that description.
Yeah.
Someone who knew how he was a tough guy.
Right.
So I'm wondering,
very cool.
If you were to talk to a young man or woman who wants to pursue ministry in any way, shape, or form, what advice would you give them?
So,
other than run away.
Yeah, lie down until the feeling goes away. So, the first thing I would ask or open up in my discussion with them is, does anybody else think this? Okay. Is this something, there's an old joke, I think it's from the South, that a hot sun and a slow mule has been responsible for many a call to the ministry. So the guy's out in the field all day and says, there's got to be a better way. I'd like to go inside and read books and think great thoughts, and there are things about what people think the ministry is that secretary, and I talk to people about theology, and I read theology, and And I do, that's part of it. But even that part of it is far messier than people tend to think. And so I would ask people this sense of an internal call. Is anybody else sharing it? And do you find yourself already doing some of the functions? If someone says, oh, I think I need to be a teacher in the church, one of the questions I would ask is, are you already leading a Bible study? Are you already teaching? Do you gravitate toward that sort of thing? Is it the sort of thing you can easily stay out of? So if other people are saying, man, you really ought to consider the ministry. Your Bible study has been so helpful to me. Or you're in college and your friends up and down the dormitory, they come and seek you out for spiritual counsel. If that's happening, that's an indicator that maybe this is a part of your life that should be cultivated and trained and pursued. But if you're going to arrive at seminary standing still on square one, and you've not had any experience with any kind of informal ministry, then maybe you're just kidding yourself.
Yeah, that's well said. That's very, very well said. I appreciate that. That's good advice. I think that can help a listener out there who's maybe thinking or teeter-tottering, about ministry. I think that was well said.
So my next question is, what you just said might be the answer to this, but I'm still curious, and that is, in your opinion, what does the church in America as a whole need to hear right now? If you could give one sermon or one piece of advice to all the churches in North America, what would you say to them?
It's that grace and forgiveness are needed everywhere in every avenue of life, and the grace and forgiveness of Christ applies everywhere. So it's not your own personal heart sins only, but it's the gospel is small p political in nature. There is absolutely no way that we could have a reformation of people being converted in the United States without it utterly transforming the political landscape. Mm-hmm. Abortion would be affected. Same-sex marriage would be affected. The worship of mammon would be affected. You simply cannot detach the public square from the claims of Christ. So I think that America needs to hear that Christ is relevant everywhere. Christ is Lord everywhere. And he's not Lord because he's the super legislator. He's Lord because he's the Savior. So it's gospel everywhere. It's so I've been thinking a lot about this. One of the problems that I think conservatives, let's call them a generic secular conservatives. I'm as conservative. I'm as conservative as the legal limits allow. Right. So when I look at little video clips and conservatives talking good sense, it really is good sense. And I look at the socialists rioting in the streets, and it makes no sense at all to me. It's chaos. But the thing that the socialists have that the conservatives don't have is the socialists brought their gods. Right? The socialists are motivated and driven by religious zeal. Conservatives are running off of inertia. Right? It's simply, well, this works, and this is pragmatic, and we're very grateful for the lifestyle that we had here in America. No. Human societies cannot cohere apart from religious faith, right? They simply cannot. And so when America was founded, that faith was Christian, and we're like the prodigal son who ran away from home, ran away from Jesus, had a huge moral inheritance that we've been squandering, buying drinks on the house for everybody, and we're about out of money. We're about done. We're looking at the pig food and wondering why we can't have some. And I think that we need to recover a robust sense of gospel preaching that plugs in everywhere.
Very interesting. Wow. So a few more questions here. If you could talk to your former self go back in time when you were thrust into ministry. You're Sunday morning, you're walking into church, you're at the doors, you have your hand on the door to walk in, young man, and you currently walk up to that person. What advice would you give?
I would say something like, remember, there is no way you're going to get out of the presence of sin.
Wow. Say a little more there. What is that?
You are, your sanctification is not complete. You're always going to be dealing with remaining sin in your own walk with God. But the people of God need pastors, and they need pastors. One of my jokes is pastors always have job security because people never quit sinning. There's somebody's always doing, quoting P.G. Woodhouse, you look at somebody's always up to something and the rest of them are up to something else. You need to understand that we require the Word of God because we're broken, busted. We're not all together. And holiness and joy in the Lord is a real possibility, but it's and set before us is what we're supposed to be cultivating and leading the people in. But if you are kidding yourself about the malignity of sin, the presence of sin, what sin can do to families, what sin can do to kids growing up, I think it was John Owen who said, be killing sin or sin will be killing you.
Yeah.
And I think I think that when I was a young man going into ministry, and some of this is inescapable, but I think I was a little bit too starry-eyed about, I'll just explain to everybody and it'll be great. I'll explain this doctrine and see, it's going to be nice and tidy, but it's glorious, but never tidy.
Very good.
Yeah. Listen, we have enjoyed our time with you immensely.
Well, thank you.
Would you be willing to do something like this in the future?
Yeah, I would follow up. Yeah.
Okay. Tell people more about your ministry. I know you run a podcast, so clearly I think people probably know about you who live in Moscow, Russia, or Idaho. But for those of us, out here, that there's going to be a lot of people listening to this who are unfamiliar. Let people know a way that they could connect with your ministry.
Probably the best clearinghouse, the one place to go where you could at least find connections to everything else would be my blog, which would be Blog and Mayblog is the name of the blog, and the address is dougwills.com. So Doug Wills, all lowercase, dougwills.com. And if you go to that blog, and you look at the landing page, there are links and connections to all the other stuff that we're doing. The other thing is if you just Googled my name, you have to be aware that I'm not everybody's favorite person. So there's a bunch of stuff out there, and some of it is even true.
Listen, so Winston Churchill said, "You have enemies? Good. That means you stood for something."
Yeah.
So we'll put the blog in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to say you've been a real blessing for Seth and I, and we know that you're going to be a blessing for others, and we pray God's blessings on you. This is going to air in October during the Pastor2Pastor theme that we have going on. Right. And so thank you. It's so nice to meet you, and we look forward to doing this again.
Good to meet you. When it airs, just send me a link or something. I'd be happy to send it out to my Twitter followers and stuff.
Cool. Okay. You want me to send it to the church's office?
That'd be fine. Yeah, that would work.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you
God
so
bless.
much. Have
Enjoyed
a great
it.